Hello, my name is Rosamond Luke, and I'm the President and CEO of the Welcoming Intercultural Newcomers Association, WINA. I thank you for supporting the WINA Wellness for International Students online event, which is being sponsored by the Red Cross and the Government of Canada. We have received an overwhelming level of positive feedback on how you've been impacted by the last presentation. And I want to use this opportunity to invite you once again for another online presentation on mental health and wellness for international students. This is scheduled for Wednesday, November 4th from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. You can use this link to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you will get a notification when we are ready to go on live. At WINA, we care. At WINA, we solve your problems. And at WINA, we're here to talk to you. Once again, connect with us on Wednesday, November 4th from 6 to 7 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
Hello and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for another virtual event. I'm going to be your MC for the next hour or so tonight. My name is Noga. Thank you again for joining us, especially to all of the guests who attended our October live virtual event as well. If you did join us on October 21st, please let us know in the chat so we can say a quick hello throughout tonight's program. I'd also like to thank the amazing staff at WINA for this event idea and the Canadian Red Cross for sponsoring this series of virtual events. Some general housekeeping points to keep us all organized tonight. I am going to begin with a quick introduction to the WINA organization before bringing in our two guest speakers for the evening. We will wrap up with a question and answer session for both speakers, so please use the chat feature on the side of your screen to submit questions throughout the evening, and we will select some of them to ask our experts. Every student who registered for tonight's event will be given a WINA wellness care package filled with healthcare essentials, such as face masks, hand sanitizers, hand soap, wipes, temperature sensors, and more. After tonight's virtual event, you will receive an email with more information about the distribution or pickup location of the gift baskets. Towards the end of tonight's event, we are also going to ask for your feedback in a quick survey, so please stay tuned for the link to our post-event evaluation and the chance to win one of 6 Sobeys gift cards. That will be towards the end of the event, so we'll give you more detail on that later. We really do appreciate your feedback, and this information will help us to continue hosting the best events for you. Now, I would like to start by giving everyone some quick background information before introducing our guest speakers. The Welcoming Intercultural Newcomers Association, which is WINA for short, formerly known as the Welcome Barbecue Association, is an intercultural organization based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. WINA started 15 years ago as a not-for-profit organization to host the annual Newcomers Student Barbecue and is now evolving to respond to the new challenges facing international students in Halifax today. As a hub for welcoming newcomer students, our members come from diverse cultural, ethnic, and religious backgrounds. Through our events, WINA provides international students in Halifax with the right resources to help them learn about their new community. WINA now also implements its diversity strategy to provide programs and services to empower our students and break down traditional barriers. Areas of focus include securing employment, mental health education, and cultural understanding. In addition, over 70% of WINA's core activities are dedicated to direct service delivery, such as settlement, employment, and social support and mentorship. Now let's talk about why we're all here today. In August of 2020, WINA began participating in a special project funded by the Canadian Red Cross. This first of its kind project is aimed specifically towards addressing mental health challenges and providing wellness support for international students who are new to Halifax and facing increased isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic. Working in collaboration with 4 universities in the area, this project will mobilize volunteers for outreach, create an online support community for our students, help with developing coping skills through monthly virtual events, and distribute kits containing hand sanitizer, PPE, and important healthcare information translated into various languages. All of this will help begin to address the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the social well-being and increased isolation that a lot of newcoming and returning international students are facing today. We would like to thank the universities for supporting this important project, as well as our community partners, churches, and student organizations. The Canadian Red Cross Emergency Support to Community Organizations program, as well as the Government of Canada and Employment and Social Development Canada. We also encourage you to thank and tag these great organizations as you share your thoughts about tonight's event on social media at Red Cross Canada and at ESDC_GC. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker, Miss Carol Shirley. Miss
Hi.
Carol has worked as a nurse. Hi, Miss Carol.
Hi.
Miss Carol has worked as a nurse and fitness expert prior to her current work as a psychologist. She combines her life experience and knowledge as a psychologist in a very compassionate way to support her clients. Miss Carol successfully integrates her love of the mind-body connection with her traditional training. She creatively and intuitively integrates meditation, guided imagery, emotional freedom technique, and Reiki into her work, empowering her clients to help themselves. Enigma Physical, Emotional, and Mental Health Studio offers psychological counseling, meditation, yoga, reflexology, and holistic nutritional consulting. Please, everyone, remember to submit your questions through the chat. Miss Carol will help us answer some questions at the end of this evening's event. Miss Carol, we're excited to hear what you've prepared for us tonight, and please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here, and I welcome each and every one of you. Thank you for choosing to be here tonight, and thank you for choosing our beautiful province to do your studies. I'm going to start with something that might seem a little bit silly, but it did come up in our last session, and the question was, how do you dress for winter here in Nova Scotia? And I think that having done it all my life, it's not something that I really thought about. And so I did. I thought about it. And I'd like to share with you that your best ways of dressing for this very cold weather is in layers. Start with a base layer, perhaps some long underwear, tights under your pants. Jeans are probably the coldest of the fabric that we would wear. And so if you can choose jeans and something under them, leggings, anything, then you're better off. Dress in layers so that when you go inside of a building, you can take off layers so you don't sit and sweat, because that sweat will turn into very cold water on your body when you leave the building. Very often what I do is I'll take off my coat and lay it across my legs so that my legs stay warm, which also helps to keep my core warm. Wear on top of your underclothing, wear your jeans, your pants, whatever you're going to wear, plus your t-shirt. So dress in what you would dress in on a daily basis in a cooler weather situation. A winter jacket is really important and something that will protect you a little bit from the wind. It seems to be that the wind is the most piercing, and you'll hear just the wind chill factor. And so it might be 0 degrees outside, but with the wind, it can be much colder. And so the wind is always a factor that you want to look out for and plan for when dressing. Wool blend socks are your best. Cotton tends to wick water toward your body, which will keep it moist and cold. And so look for something as far as wool blends are your best. Get winter boots, get some good gloves. No, I don't mean leather gloves, I mean a glove that's going to keep your hand warm. Also, scarf and hat are a really good idea, and always just to have them with you, because you'll notice that in Nova Scotia we talk about the weather a lot. And the reason we talk about it a lot is because it's constantly changing. And so, if you're always prepared wherever you are, then you'll have what you need to keep yourself warm. I talk about the fact that it's just as important to hydrate in the winter as it is in the summer months. And so always have a beverage with you. Drink your water, hydrate your body. And although this might sound a little odd too, the way you can tell if you're hydrated or not is to check the color of your urine. If your urine is not clear, then you're not hydrated. Problems with dehydration are the same, summer, winter. You can get headaches from not being hydrated. You'll get some brain fog, so you won't be able to think as clearly. And so keep drinking. And the bonus of that too is you'll find that in our winter months, your skin will get drier. You'll get more chapped lips, especially if you're not hydrated. And so it helps to keep your skin a little bit better. Get out in the sun as often as you can. What we know is that there's a form of depression called SADS, or seasonal affective disorder. People who come from countries that are typically warm year round tend to have issues with this type of depression when in our province. We really want you to consider, if you're already starting to feel a little bit lower in your mood or in your energy, is to get what we call a sun lamp or sun therapy. And to have that sun lamp gives your body what it needs to use the vitamin D. You can also have a vitamin D supplement, but it's one way of preventing that depression or that type of depression from getting worse across the winter months. Most people who suffer from it tend to notice by mid-October their mood starting to lower with the change in the daylight hours. And you've probably noticed by now that we don't have a whole lot of daylight in our hours anymore. And so your evenings are going to be in the dark. And so not getting what we need, especially if you haven't acclimatized. And I've lived here all my life, so not an issue, but it is an issue for many people who come from other countries where you don't enjoy or you don't have winters or cold winters like we have. I want to go into and talk a little bit about COVID and the effects of COVID. What we've noticed in our province in the last 9 months are that there's, I don't know who, but many people, their coping strategies. We've had a 240% increase in alcohol sales. You know that in our country, marijuana is legal. There's been a significant increase in that, also a significant increase in its use. And I'd say don't have any problem if you want to use alcohol or drugs, but use them so that you're not coping, that they're meant to be used to enhance a moment or to perhaps use to aid in sleep, not alcohol, that will in the long run not work, but use it in a way so that you're not using it to cope. If you find that you're using drugs or alcohol to cope, you're in trouble. Go look for help. Find somebody at WINA, go to WINA, go to your university and look in the Department of Student Affairs and find yourself a counselor or somebody that you can learn other coping strategies from. One of the biggest effects of COVID has really been an increase in isolation. And I'd like to talk about isolation in being a little bit different than loneliness. In that isolation, there's many of us who are maybe highly sensitive personality types who need to isolate on occasion just to recharge, or people who are introverts rather than extroverts. We tend to want to isolate for periods of time so that we can recharge. Where if you're an extrovert, the difficulties come in because there's just not as many social opportunities and gatherings or places that you can go to kind of get that feed of energy that you need as an extrovert. And so being socially isolated doesn't necessarily mean that you're lonely. Loneliness is more a frame of mind that we get when we feel disconnected or not connected well enough, quality or otherwise, with people. And so loneliness is something that we're seeing a lot more of. It's dissatisfaction with your level of social connectedness. And loneliness begets loneliness. And so one of the things that we tend to do is spend a lot of time in our head thinking about how lonely we are. And I'd say that's a cycle of loneliness is that thinking. And so what I'd rather you do is maybe ask yourself why you feel lonely, why you feel lonely. So start problem solving, start really critically analyzing the way that you feel and understand why you're feeling lonely. Understanding your situation will help you understand the kind of help or the action that you can take in order to feel better in the long term. One of the things we suggest too is to avoid comparing yourself with other people. Don't compare yourself to other people. No two of us are the same, and what works for me may or may not work for you. You can ask people what they do. You can have conversations and perhaps try some of their strategies and see if they're going to work for you. But comparing yourself to other people is never a healthy thing to do. Making assumptions about other people and what they're thinking or what they're feeling is just a bad idea. It's not going to be helpful for you in the long run. Give yourself time to adjust. We need time to adjust in any new or life-changing event. And the fact that you're in this country is a big event. Recognize with or without COVID, there would be some adjusting time, some looking around at ways we do things, way we say things, how things are laid out. And very often when we experience these differences, we have a tendency to judge those differences as either better or worse than what we're used to. And I'd say, notice whether you're judging it or not, because if you're judging it as worse, you're increasing your level of loneliness for home and the way things are done there. One positive thing I would say about COVID is that we've been forced to become a little bit more mindful. We've come off automatic pilot in many ways because the ways we did things are very different. And so even those of us who have lived here forever are looking at new ways and experiencing new ways of doing things. And so be patient with yourself, be kind with yourself, and expect that it's going to take a little bit of time to change your level and to adjust. Look at the bigger picture. Remember the reason you're here. You're here to go to university and to get the degree that you came here to get. And if you can remember that and keep your actions based around that, then I think your focus will be pointing you in the right direction. Find ways of taking advantage of the time that you have alone. Perhaps for some of you, it'll be the first time you've been responsible for your own laundry, responsible for your own meals, responsible for getting yourself to school or your day-to-day commitments. And so be very kind to yourself and schedule those things, build some structure, build some routine into your life. And that will be helpful not only with the loneliness, but also in giving you direction. Building relationships is a very important part of your experience. And what I want you to stop to think about is the kind of relationships that you'd like to build, what you prefer. Do you prefer small groups? Do you prefer larger groups? Are you looking for organizations or sports or clubs? Are you looking for study groups? And so be really clear with yourself about what it is that you want and what you need and what you believe will help you to adjust and to feel like you belong here for the time that you're here. Slow and steady always wins the race. Take your time. Take time to build the kinds of relationships that you like. I'd say, I grew up being very aloof, and sometimes I know if we're feeling a little bit anxious or if we're feeling and judging other people as better or that they're smarter. Students have told me that, the people around here just look smarter than me. And I know you can't tell how smart someone is by the way they look. And so don't get in your head so much and recognize the assumptions and the distortions that you're creating for yourself and making it more difficult. Being aloof, it kind of looks like this. Somebody says hi and you say hi, and they say how are you and you say fine. You're really not adding to any level of conversation. And so really had to force myself to do it differently, recognizing that I'd like to have friends or people in my life who want to talk to me. And so when they say hi, I say, hi, how are you doing today? It's a beautiful day. Isn't the snow pretty with the sun on it? So I'm going to give a few words. At the end of that, I might, they say, how are you? And I say, I'm really good. I'm good. I'm working. I'm doing pretty good in my business, or my kids are great. And so I want to add a little bit to my answers so that when I answer, I give you something else that you can ask me a question about. And so think about the way you interact and how you might be able to put a little bit more effort in your interactions so that you can achieve the goals you set for yourself. Keep and continue to foster the relationships that you have with friends and family at home. 4 years, although it might sound like a long time, it's going to go pretty fast. And those relationships that you have at home are really important. It's about minimizing regrets and recognizing that by the time you go home in 4 years, I hope you get there before that and visit, but in 4 years from now, home can look pretty different than it does today. And so really stay connected to the people in your life who are important to you and minimize any regrets that you might be creating by not doing that. I also would like to say I'm sure many of you have heard the expression COVID fatigue syndrome. And what COVID fatigue syndrome actually means is the people who have had COVID and the experiences that they have following COVID, and that those people have lingering or persistent fatigue, and so hence the name COVID fatigue. But when we hear that expression, I recognize that many of us can relate to it. And so I've been very much observing myself and others around me, and also in interactions with clients. And what I've recognized over the last couple months is that there is a general sense of fatigue. So it's not COVID fatigue, but it's fatigue because of COVID. There's also numerous others that I'd like to mention. You might experience more vivid dreams. You might be waking between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. We have issues with tinnitus or ringing in the ears. Balance tends to be an issue. More and more people are talking about vertigo or feeling dizzy and not having any medical explanation as to why. There's a heightened sense of sensitivity, a heightened sense of anxiety. You might be experiencing sensitivity to light, sound, smells, or to have lower levels of productivity. It's the one I hear the most. I can complete in an 8-hour day what I used to do in 4 hours. And so people are really experiencing those differences. There's also a general lower level of motivation. So it might require some really positive self-talk to motivate yourself to do the things that you need to do in order to be successful. We're feeling difficulty sometimes with concentrating. There seems to be a common loss of time, that time just seems to be warping by big speeds. And then we have some significant sleep issues. I need to say that for your mental health, sleep is one of the most important things you can do. We need that recuperative sleep. If you have persistent issues with sleep, then get some help, because soon after that, you're going to start experiencing some forms of depression, other mental health issues. And so if you're having a really difficult time with sleep, talk to somebody about that and see what can be done to help you. We are hearing complaints about feeling ungrounded, unusually exhausted, some brain fog. So it's like, oh, why did I walk in this room? I don't remember. Or just what was I going to do? And sort of feeling like you're losing your memory, or just generally feeling a little bit crazy. We also have among us, and if you subscribe to Jungian theory, you'll understand the collective. And in the collective, there's a whole lot of grief, a lot of sense of loss. We've all lost many things, even though it may not have been through a death. We've lost our sense of routine. We don't get in our car and drive to work anymore. To think about going to a store requires some pre-planning. And so there's a loss or a sense of grief, a sense of Our purpose may feel like it's different. It doesn't matter so much anymore. We even start to wonder who we are. So we're questioning our identity. And sometimes the passion that we felt for life seems to be waning a little bit. This is where I would ask if you have any questions. um, I also wanted to just sort of go over for you characteristics of resilience, and it's your resilience. I want you to remember and recognize that nothing in your life has stopped you from getting here thus far. And I would say, whatever skills and strategies you're using, identify them so you know what they are and have them as your toolbox or have them as tools to use so that you can continue to draw upon them when you need them. And so getting to know yourself is a very, very important part of your survival and thriving in this COVID environment. People who are resilient tend to have a sense of control. We recognize that my personal responsibility is to control what I think, say, and do, and I have no control over what anybody else says, thinks, or does. And so that sense of control is an internal sense of control. Good problem solving skills, strong social connections. And so, again, find out what those connections are for you and where you can make them, and then work to build them and make them stronger. See this situation as temporary. It's all temporary. Whatever you were worried about a year ago, you probably couldn't tell me what it is. Resilient people are also able to ask for help, and I strongly encourage you that if you're thinking you need help, ask for help. Nobody in the helping profession is going to think less of you. They're not going to make fun of you. They're not going to judge you. That's what we do. We're here to help people, and that's what we want to do. And so when people ask us for that help, then that's our purpose being fulfilled. Also, resilient people practice acceptance, cultivate self-awareness, and practice self-compassion. Find perspective, find a way of looking at any situation where it makes it easier for you to accept what it is. Might not like it, but the acceptance is a very big and important part of it. And I'd say, most importantly, get out of your head. Even if you're saying it out loud to yourself, sometimes we have the opportunity of hearing ourselves, and we can really appreciate when we hear ourselves. Perhaps we can even solve our own problems. So get out of your head. Have a wonderful year, and thank you.
Wow, thank you, Miss Carol. I feel like I just listened to 15 hours of talk, not 15 minutes, because there was so much information in that segment alone. So thank you. I mean, from everything you talked about for dressing for winter, for how it affects us differently, to getting outside, getting active, different coping mechanisms. There was so much information. So I encourage all of you, if you didn't quite catch all that, you can always go back and watch some of that over again. And don't forget, Miss Carol is going to stick around with us. So if you do have any questions, put them in the chat, and we will pick some questions to ask later on. So thank you, Miss Carol. We will see you in just a little bit. Stick around with us on the line so we can ask you some questions at the end of the session. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our second guest speaker, Dr. Chinekwa Obidoa. Welcome. How are you, Doctor? I can't hear you. I'm going in the meantime to tell our guests that the choice for our second guest speaker, Dr. Chinekwa Obidoa, was inspired by a question that was asked at our first virtual event. So if you were there with us in October, you may have seen that on the topic of culture shock. Dr. Obidoa is an author and an award-winning researcher on this topic, and she is currently working as an associate professor of global health and Africana studies at Mercer University. She is a multidisciplinary scholar trained in the fields of medical geography, public health, and international area studies. Her research work focuses on the health and well-being of youth and emerging adults of African descent. She is also a certified life coach who specializes in the area of life purpose, transitions, and career coaching. She has over 25 years of experience working with youth and children from multiple cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Doctor, let me check if I can hear you. So everyone, please remember you can submit questions through the chat feature on the YouTube Live. And Dr. Obidoa, go ahead. I'm going to see that everyone can hear you.
Because
I can hear you now.
okay, you can hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you so much.
All right. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So good evening, everyone. I am certainly delighted to be here this evening to share with you all. I would like to say thank you to Ms. Rosamond Luke, the President and CEO of WINA, as well as to Noga and Olu for putting all this together. So thank you so much. And I look forward to a really engaging session with you all. Okay. All right. You can still hear me, right? Okay.
Yes,
All
I can
right.
hear you,
So
Doctor.
okay, so I would like to have my slides to go on. We're going to be talking about culture shock today. And once my slides are showing, I will go ahead and start. Okay. Do you know where the slides? Okay. Okay. So, have you heard from Olu? All right. Here we
Can you see?
go.
I see it now. Perfect.
I see it now. So, so the title of my short talk is "Culture Shock: Embrace, Transform, and Leverage." So, if you forget anything I shared with you this evening, I don't want you to forget these three words: embrace, transform, and leverage. So, let's go to the next slide, and we'll start by defining what culture shock really is. Next slide, please. So, well, no, go back to the first one. Yeah. Yes. So let's start with this humor. I like humor a lot. So, somebody asked, what is culture shock? And the response was culture shock is this massive or gigantic, massive shock wave that will hit you when you arrive in the West, right? It is something that you cannot basically overlook. Culture shock is real. It's an experience that literally every person who has not grown up in the West experiences when they move to the West, to study or to live. But of course, this is not the real definition of culture shock. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, can I have the next slide? Okay, so here we have a more realistic definition of culture shock. And this definition basically situates it as a feeling of disorientation that people experience suddenly, who are subjected to an unfamiliar culture or way of life or set of attitudes that are just different from what they are used to. It can also arise from an individual's unfamiliarity with local customs and language and what is acceptable behavior in their new environment. Okay, so basically summarizing this, culture shock is kind of a feeling. Let's go back to the other slide, please. The definition of culture shock. It's a feeling. Also, it's also sometimes goes beyond your feeling. Sometimes it actually translates to a real experiences that you have. Now, it's important to note that culture shock, there's a wide range of things that constitute culture shock. You can go to the next slide now. And people experience culture shock in different ways based on age. Culture shock also differs based on your country of origin and how much exposure you had to Western culture. There is also culture shock that is based on your personality. Your experience of culture shock is also based on your personality, your ethnicity, sometimes even gender, right? So even though culture shock is this encompassing experience, everybody experiences it to some extent differently, right? And it ranges from some minor things to some very, very serious and problematic things. Now, on this slide, I just highlight a few as culture shock examples of sources of culture shock that I am sure most international students experience when they get to a place like Canada or the US. And of course, allow me to humor myself. I was an international student and I experienced a lot of different types of culture shock. So example will be, you talk to students and they tell you, wow, having people making out in the public, it was a shock to me, right? Things like calling people by their first name. This is something you find in the West, right? Professors telling you, just call me Steve, just call me Anne. And for some of us who come from other parts of the world, it's a little bit like, what? I always have to put auntie or uncle or sir or ma in front of my salutation. And then we talk about things like calculating the cost of everything in your mind, the price shock, the retail tax shock. What about the use of a left hand? Most of the indigenous cultures, there's the fetish associated with the left hand. It brings bad luck. And sometimes you find that you try to apologize, to people for using a left hand and they don't know what you're talking about. What about food? Food shock, all the different kinds of food and the tastes, and even issues like self-service at the gas station. For some of us, it's like, wow, most of us come from countries where there is somebody at the gas station to serve you. And I think more interestingly is how marriage is done in the West. For many of you from Asia or Africa, you know that marriage is a long journey, right? So here people marry without the dowry most of the time, without the initial introduction, or pretty much like even having a traditional wedding, right? It's like, wow, this is just kind of weird. So I've just picked a few sources, a few examples of culture shock that these ones are more trivial, to me. I think they're a little bit just less as serious as some of the other deeper sources of culture shock we may experience. Next slide, please. All right. So it turns out that the whole experience of culture shock occurs over a trajectory, right? Or rather, our experience in the West or unfolds in phases. So the first phase is this phase of euphoria, right? And fascination. So the very first period, once you land in that space, there is the honeymoon period, they call it. This is a period where everything is novelty, you're fascinated, and it's just like amazing. The convenience of the West is just attractive. And then gradually, things start to set in and culture shock starts to really emerge and feel real. And that's when things like criticism and stereotyping and even what we call differences are compared. And then you start feeling a little bit not so as excited as you were within the first 2 weeks of your arrival to this space. But that's not the end of the story. People who have studied the experience of international students say that there's also a next phase, that the longer you stay in that space, there is now you transition to this phase called learning, right? Where you now start pretty much getting to know the culture a little bit better. Understanding it is more important. Understanding or having a bigger network and an increased comfort level of navigating, culture in your new environment. And that pretty much transitions to adjustment. This is now where you're more stable. You now accept or pretty much are comfortable with the culture and even become more immersed in it, and enjoyment starts to become something that you can experience. But I want to mention that this is not guaranteed. This transition, this beautiful phase by phase transition is not guaranteed. That just because you arrived and you experience culture shock does not mean that you climb that other hill smoothly. That there's a lot of other things that this adjustment is predicated on. And we're going to talk about it. Next slide, please. All right. So remember the curve, right? So a lot of times when people hit that second base of culture shock, right, they start experiencing some negative things that actually begin to affect a lot of their attitude towards their time in the new location. And really, the way you negotiate these effects of culture shock will determine, like I said, your transition to learning and adjustment. So, for example, in the midst of all these changes and new food and new language, people start feeling confused, right? And unsure of themselves. And a lot of things are unclear. And sometimes you'll be surprised, depending on how traumatic some of your encounters are, it can actually leave you quite perplexed. So the examples I gave are a little bit humor related, and you could walk away from those situations without much consequence. But sometimes there's some encounters you could have with people, with systems, with processes that leave you a little disoriented and bewildered and just stressed out, because culture shock is stressful, right? And your assignment now becomes, how do I deal with or cope with or navigate culture shock so that I'm not, I'm able to transition to that other hill of learning and adjustment. Okay. Now, how you manage these effects of culture shock also hinges on two important things. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. So, and on this slide, basically what those two things are is what we call ethnocentrism and relativism. Well, these are two important cultural concepts, right? So with ethnocentrism, it really has to do with the notion that a culture should be understood in the standards of one's own culture. So basically, you're looking at a culture using your own culture as the standard, right? So when you're experiencing all these culture shock encounters, the way you interpret them and what you take away from that experience really is hinged on the way you see culture. So if you're walking out of this concept of ethnocentrism, you basically look at the new culture with the standards of your own culture. And to you, certain things that are done in this new culture become wrong, become irrelevant, unjustifiable. And it involves looking at another person's culture from your own perspective. And at the end of the day, this concept is just about believing that your culture is better and correct and normal compared to the host culture, the new culture you're in. But relativism is the opposite of this. This is where you understand the culture on its own terms, right? Not using the standards of your own culture. It involves looking at another culture by its own perspective instead of your own perspective, and understanding that no culture is better than the other, right? So at the end of the day, these two concepts begin to show up, right, in the way we handle or deal with culture shock. And it becomes really, really important that during this experience, you really recognize what's happening inside of you and what kind of lens with which you're using to experience and interpret your experiences in the new country. Okay? So technically, relativism will be the position or the positionality that allows you to engage culture shock with less stress, right? And with less damaging effects. Because in reality, no culture is better than the other culture. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do we do? How do I handle culture shock? I mean, we can make a list that goes on, but I thought I would just keep it very simple since we have very short time frame. And I will start by saying, please don't take yourself too seriously. Okay, don't take things too seriously. Culture shock is a guarantee. So make sure that you prep yourself and decide that, okay, I'm not going to take this more serious than what it is. It's just a difference in culture. And that's what it is. So that means you got to be patient with yourself. You will not learn everything about a culture in 1 week or in 1 month. So make sure that you don't put yourself on a pedestal or expect that every conversation, every interaction, everything you do within this culture is going to be 100% perfect. You're going to get it some days, you're not going to get it some days. You're going to feel like a failure some days, and some days you're going to feel like, wow. So don't take things too seriously. Be patient with yourself. And more importantly, find humor in awkwardness. Because all about culture shock is a lot of it is about awkwardness, right? So a professor tells you, stop saying good morning to me, or stop calling me sir or ma'am, I'm not that old. Laugh to yourself. This is not a moment to go cry or sulk or feel bad, right? So always look to find humor in the awkwardness of culture and what you experience. Ask a lot of questions, right? So when things start getting a little bit confusing, just stop and say, please, I don't understand this. Tell me what's going on here. Find and connect with people dealing with similar issues. And just like the previous speaker said, make sure that you form good social ties with people, because people can share with you how they've coped with such awkward moments or such difficulties like finding food or the weather and so on. And then set a regular time to socialize. Again, the previous speaker talked about structure and routine. So it's one thing to say, oh, I catch up with her from time to time. No, make it a point of duty, especially during this period of COVID, to say every Friday evenings between 3 and 5 or 5 and 7, we're going to hang out together and we're going to share notes on what we're learning about the culture or how we're coping. Reading books and watching movies also helps. But remember that there's a lot of stereotypes and there's a lot of things that could be infused in movies and books that may not necessarily be real. So just do that with some caution. And then engage in small chat with locals and make friends with locals and internationals. Because at the end of the day, it's about your comfort level. It's improving your comfort level. And you can't improve that just by observing and talking to yourself. A lot of it is something that is built on a daily basis. And I also remember that culture shock, you're not only exposed to the dominant culture, there are other international students, there are other people that you're interacting with. So culture shock can also be multidimensional, but the major source of it is from the dominant or the host culture. So make friends with people, apart from acquaintances. Focus on what is happening inside of you. So this is really the crux of my presentation today. Because really, what happens with international students and culture shock is the way you negotiate, because a lot of identity reconvergence, realigning of values, you're recalibrating who you are, and you're beginning to see yourself. Am I Western? Am I not? Who am I really? And sometimes in the process of experiencing culture shock, we rewrite our identity in a way that is not healthy, right? And just because we don't want to be associated with our home culture, or we're ashamed of it, or we want to change our accent. So really focus on what's happening inside of you. Remember our conversation about ethnocentrism and relativism. And I think that the more you're more on the relativism side, you free yourself from following a very rigid cultural code, in the sense that you don't lose who you are, you don't lose your center, right? And as this new person is emerging, embrace it. It has to be a healthy identity. It cannot be identity that looks back on your home culture and you hate it, because culture shock can also make you do that. And that's the reverse side of ethnocentrism. So you adopt the new culture and you believe that the Western culture is better or more superior. And then you start looking at your host culture, your home culture, as inferior. And that really messes with your identity. So what I really want you to do is, as you experience culture shock, please pay attention. Focus on what's happening on the inside of you. Okay? Next slide. And I'm almost done. So, and then transform. There's some benefits of culture shock actually. So, like some studies, this work done by the Walk the World, they found that the culture shock has helped them better understand their own cultural values. And 97% said they felt their time living in another culture inspired greater maturity. 96% felt more confident in themselves. Throughout the experience, some people continue to influence their interactions with different cultures. For some people, it helped them develop more sophisticated way of looking at the world. So culture shock is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just how you negotiate it and how you eventually leverage all the benefits, or all how you balance the pros and the cons. And then the very last slide. And this is the last slide. And basically, it says leverage. So, leverage means taking advantage, taking control, and turning the table. So, you're not just the victim, or you're not just this person who needs to be explained the culture to, or somebody who's subject to this dominant culture. You actually become an active participant in the cultural exchange. All right. And that's pretty much what I have to share with you all.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That was a fabulous presentation. We have gotten so much content tonight from both you and Miss Carol. I just feel very lucky that we were able to have both of you on board tonight to speak. I know that for me, a big takeaway from your presentation with the chart and all of the really basically scientific explanations is very comforting to me. Even though I've been living in this country more than 15 years, it really shows that the process of moving countries and culture shock is so common. So it is something that we can go through together as a community. It's not an individual process that one person goes through. So maybe through these events and with you speaking and Miss Carol and other guests that have joined us, it's a nice way for us to bring people together and talk about these things. Okay, so with that, we're going to begin the question and answer portion of the evening. And since I have you on the screen, Doctor, here, I'm going to start with one for you. Would you mind just doing another quick explanation of the relativism approach? I lost sound for a quick minute during that, so if you don't mind doing that again, I'm not sure if we can put the slide back on the screen as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
So relatives, I'll start talking, and then when he has the slide up, I'll make reference to it as well. So it's kind of
Perfect.
opposite from the ethnocentric approach to viewing culture. It's more liberal, right? It's more actually realistic. So this is when you look at a culture or you judge a culture in its own terms, right? From its own perspective. So if I'm taking a look at, for example, this issue of left hand, right? Not using the left hand. So why does it have to be bad, right? This is not the way they see the world. They don't see anything wrong with using my left hand. So just judge the culture based on its own merits and its own terms. Okay? So no, go back to the other slide. No, go back to keep going back. Keep going. Anyway, so that's the main point. And then also the fact that ultimately what it results from is when you don't think your culture is better than the other culture, because we struggle with this a lot. Everybody walks around thinking my culture is it. That's why we have culture shock, because like, can you imagine they had a wedding, there was no dowry. Oh my word, right? Because we think that that's your culture is the best. So that's really what relativism is about.
That makes perfect sense to me. I'm happy that we got to hear that explanation again, to piece all the pieces together. That's perfect. And my second question for you, Dr. Opidoa, and maybe Ms. Carroll can help us after your response, is obviously during the COVID-19 pandemic that we're still in now,
Mhm,
how does that affect culture shock for people? Because if someone has moved to a new place, like either right before or
mhm,
during the pandemic, they can't
mhm,
really experience the culture in its
mhm,
normal
mhm.
way, really. There aren't the normal festivals or holiday celebrations or even friends gathering and things like that. So, is that something that you've been thinking about recently?
Yeah, there's a two-sided, a double-edged effect of COVID on culture shock. So the double-edged effect is one, there's a positive and there's a not so positive. So the positive is that, well, you probably experience less culture shock because you're not doing the festivals, you're not interacting with people face to face, and you're not seeing some lived experiences. So that reduces some of, or manages to an extent, some of what you're exposed to, right? But on the other side, the not so good experience is that being isolated or being, without people, you don't get to resolve those things early enough, experience them, because you see, culture shock is resolved in social interaction, asking questions, observation, building mastery and familiarity. So when I'm locked out of those social experiences and connecting with people, and testing out things, I'm really kind of set back, right? So it's something that, again, consciousness, mindfulness, like Carol talked about, knowing that, listen, I'm going to have to recreate my environment to an extent. And I'm not saying get out of your house and rush to go experience culture shock, but figure out ways to balance this, not interacting with people. Maybe read more books, watch movies, but don't be like in a world, like in a bubble. Don't just be in that ignorant bubble. So when you come out, you're gonna be lost. So that's what I have to share.
I think that's exactly right. So many important points to talk about there. It's hard in isolation for people, and it's even harder if someone just moved to a new place. What do you think, Miss Carroll?
When I define culture, I define it fairly simply, and I think about culture being the way things are, just the way things are, the way things usually are around here. And the way things
Mm,
usually are around here, there's no usual anymore. You'll see the usual in your systems, how you sign up for classes, what maybe, I don't know, what's talked about in the class. If you go to a store, it's so different. And I think maybe in this topic, it's a wonderful time to think about the leveraging. in that there's nothing more that we crave for as human beings is to understand other human beings. And there's always that shame. We're talking about Black Lives Matters, we're talking about Indigenous peoples and their cultures. How about we have an open dialogue and ask some of the hard questions and talk about the way things usually are around here and what's it like in your place? You know, some of the things you're going to see, you're going to be like, oh, I like that. We should do that at our place. And then there's going to be other things you're going to look at and think, oh, no, I don't want anything to do with that. And so it's kind of a big buffet of life. Take from it what you like, but look at it all and sample it and decide yourself what works for you and what doesn't, and have some conversation so that we can benefit as people who usually live here from what you bring. There's so much value in that for us, for me particularly, because I can speak for me. But please never be ashamed of where you come from, even in comparison. When you're comparing, you're saying one's better than the other. And like we've both said already, is that it's not about better or worse. It's just about different. Help me understand how it's different. Broaden my mind. Thank you.
Yes, true.
That's such an important point. Yeah, exactly. Remembering that people from other cultures coming to Canada or coming anywhere else in the world have so much value to add. And it's really about how we can be the most understanding, the most compassionate, and what we can do all together to understand each other better and, you know, make hopefully positive change. Great answers for those questions to start us off. And the next question for you, Miss Carol, is do you have any advice to deal with the aggressive news cycles that seem like they never stop these days?
Turn them off. I know. It's kind of, you know, what we think about, we bring about. And if we're watching a television show, or if we're engrossed in negativity or things that cause us distress, then turn it off. It was an alarm that was ringing and you wanted to stop it, you turn it off. So turn the TV off if it's causing you distress. If you can't watch it without getting upset, then don't watch it. Because what you're thinking about is upsetting your body. As soon as you upset your body, you're attacking your immune system. And we all need healthy immune systems right now. And so if it doesn't give you pleasure and it's outside of your responsibilities as a student, then don't do it.
So important to remember.
It's important that it's like eating. You know, we pay attention to the food we eat. Pay attention to what you ingest outside of yourself.
And that's exactly the approach of your studio, right? It's a holistic medicine. We have to take care of our bodies as well as our minds. And there are lots of ways to do that, but we have to be really aware of the food we're consuming and the information we're consuming and the people that are around us. So we really have to look at the whole and take that approach sometimes as well.
Yes.
That's a great answer. My next question here, Dr. Obidoa, for you is how do I keep my own cultural identity while also adjusting to a new one? We talked a little bit about this.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it starts from, first of all, a healthy place. Okay? You have to already have a healthy and grounded identity. And unfortunately, because of the colonial conquest and all the way the globalization works, a lot of times, if you're coming from, they call it a developing country, there is this inferiority complex that is already infused in your psyche, in your identity somehow, because the West is supposed to be better than home, right? And there's a validity in a way because we are coming to the West to school, right? So obviously there's probably something better academically. But you have to realize that just because the schools are better, or just because things are a little bit easier, it doesn't negate the value or the richness right, in your own culture. So it really has to start from a healthy place. And then as you come in to engage this new culture, hold on to your identity tight, right? Now, it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that aspects of you will not change. Of course, things will change. But the fact that you still cherish and value your culture. Okay. So how do you, balance your identity while you're in a new culture? Well, just first of all, make up your mind or set that's precedent that again, while my culture may where I'm coming from may lack a few things, is not necessarily superior or inferior to where I'm going, because superior will be ethnocentric, right, and inferior will not be healthy. But when you're now in the new culture, learn the language. If you want to get the accent, get it. But try your best not to assimilate. Assimilating means throwing off your original culture, discarding it because you think it's inferior, and just becoming or trying to become because you never really become, right? So, in a nutshell, it's about healthy, starting from a healthy place, staying centered, staying connected, right, to your home culture, to your family. And just also, like Miss Carol said, the world is a buffet. Pick and choose, leverage what's out there so that you don't lose your who you are.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so much great advice, and it's just so nice to have different perspective from both of you ladies this evening. Miss Carol with the holistic approach to health and wellness and well-being, and Dr. Obidura with all of your experience as an international student yourself, and all of the research that you've studied and bringing us here today to learn from has been so beneficial. So thank you again to both of you. I'm going to ask one more question, a little bit of a different one for both of you to answer. But with winter coming and the seasons have changed so quickly this year, it seems like. What kind of physical activity or hobbies are you planning to get into over this season? Because we probably won't be able to enjoy it like we usually do.
I love to cross country ski. I have vertigo, so going downhill skiing is a bad idea for me. Um, but we do have two amazing ski hills in Nova Scotia. I also, on days that aren't so windy, I like to get out and just be in the snow. Sometimes I'll play in the snow. And if you've never experienced snow, you need to do that. You need to touch it, you need to feel it. And don't eat yellow snow, but you can have snow cones with it or put maple syrup on it. It's quite lovely. I also really find that where I'm home a lot more now and not in my studio, I tend to do yoga on YouTube, listen to meditations. YouTube has become my very good friend.
Hmm.
I also like to
It's
cook.
such a
Do
great
those,
resource.
yeah, it is. Yeah.
Cool.
Anything you want to do, you
All
can just type into YouTube, like even WINA, health and wellness, and
right. Yeah. Well, for me, I have to start by saying where I currently live. I live in Macon, Georgia, which is in the south of the United States, right?
Beautiful.
So, unlike New England and Canada, our weather in the winter is less harsh. It gets
Hmm.
really cold, but there's no snow. Okay. So what I have been doing is walking. I walk a lot. Well, some people debate that, but I walk. Okay. So I walk and I have added an evening schedule to it. So I will do a rounds around the space. And now that it's getting colder, I move my walking indoors. So if there are students, people who live in dorms and with long hallways, I would circle all the floors and come down, and then also running up the stairs. So in the winter, when you can't exercise or you're too lazy to go to the gym, I run up and down the stairs, and it does do a good job for your arms and for your abs. So that's what I've been up to this period.
I would like to also add that some of our outdoor recreation programs are pretty awesome. I don't know exactly what's being offered, but you can borrow free of charge snowshoes and go snowshoeing. There's different resources, and so really look at your resources and see what's there. I mean, you might do it once and never want to do it again, but trying it, you might love it. Go skating if you have the opportunity. There's an oval on the Commons in Halifax, and you can also get or borrow skates there, so you don't need to purchase your own. There's no expense to that.
That's a great idea. And, even if you don't like it, skating or snowshoeing, doing it once, it will be a great story that you'll tell forever. So it's definitely worth
Absolutely.
trying. That's great, great advice. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions, and we're just getting ready to wrap up. So, with that, last question answered, I think we are ready to wrap up. I'm going to say another big, big thank you to all of our guests for joining us this evening and our fabulous speakers, Miss Carol, Dr. Obidoa, for lending their expertise. Thank you again, ladies. I'd also like to thank the amazing staff at WINA Halifax for this event idea and the Canadian Red Cross for sponsoring this series of virtual events. Don't forget to look out for our follow-up email with more information about the gift baskets, and please keep in mind there will also be upcoming opportunities to sign up as volunteers for WINA and more virtual events coming soon. Please visit our website for more information, www.winacanada.org, and follow us on our social media channels. We can't wait for your feedback and to see you at our next event. Have a great evening, everyone.
You too. Have a good evening.